Hello and welcome to the modeling of the Phantasm Ball tutorial for CS281 Pipelines for Video Games. I'm currently using Maya 2015. Make sure you have the same version. If you have a different version, you may not find the same menus. So let's jump in. First of all, we want to make sure that we are working consistently in the same sizes and units as everyone else. So we want to check our settings. And you'll do so first of all by going to the drop down for Window, then going to Settings Preferences, and within that submenu going to Preferences. When you click on that, your options for preferences will come up. There's another way of bringing this window up, which is in the rightmost corner, lower rightmost corner in Maya. There's an icon of the red running man. Click on that and preferences come up as well. In the leftmost column here, click on Settings and make sure under Working Units you've got set from all these selections, choose Foot. And then choose, as long as you're here, NTSC 30 frames per second for the time. And press save. Make sure that your grid has not changed. If it has, you need to come into the second step, which is going up to the display menu, going to the options for the grid, and making sure that you've got these numbers for your grid display. Now that we're all working in feet, we want to make sure that the grid reflects that every single unit you see, every gray square, is a foot. And with these numbers, you now have a matrix of 10 by 10 on each of the four coordinates of the X, Y, Z. And you've also got grid lines every unit. So basically you have the assurance that each one of these little gray squares is 1 foot. Alright, the first thing we want to do is we want to come down here to create polygon primitives. Make sure that you are in polygons mode. I was in animation mode, which does still have create, but we're going to be starting to use later tools, and to utilize those we need to make sure that we're in the polygons mode in Maya. As you can see, mesh, edit mesh, and mesh tools display when I'm in polygons, and if it's left into any other mode in Maya, they disappear. So make sure you're in polygons and come up here to create polygon primitives, sphere. You also want to make sure that you've got interactive creation turned off. If you leave it on, which Maya has on by default, it will constantly harangue you to give it the measurements in width and height of any of the geometry you want. And sometimes you just want a bloody sphere. So turn that off so that next time you say select geometry, it simply pops in. Now I've got this sized correctly because I came in and manipulated it to be the correct size for this demo, but in case your sphere comes in at a smaller size, like so, or larger size and swallows the grid like so, we want to come in here to the channel box layer editor and manipulate the amount of polygons it's using to construct the sphere. And you do so by clicking on, in the channel box layer editor, its history. Now if you don't see this window in your right side of Maya, that's okay. You just have to come up here and make sure that of these four icons, only the rightmost one is depressed. So that you're looking at the channel box layer editor, and then you come over to Inputs. Click on Polysphere 1, and it should open up and show you all the history and the history of the object's construction. So in this case, we want to directly manipulate the history of this sphere so that it now we will all consistently have the same amount of polygons. And so in the radius, we want to type in 10. You'll see it shrink, and it should just kind of have the grid as it's skirting around the circumference. And then we type in 18 for the subdivisions in the axis, and 18 again for the subdivisions in the height. Now we are assured to have the same size as well as the same geometry of everybody else building this particular model. Now one of the things I find really helps when I'm constructing a model is that I can go between these modes up here. This is an icon for wireframe. This is the icon for smooth shading. And I like this one, which is wireframe on shaded. When I click it, you will not only see the shading, but you'll also see the wireframe of its construction. And that just sort of helps for now. So if you want to, you can click that on. It's a toggle button, so you turn it on, turn it off. Of course, it only affects that which you have selected. And let's jump in now to deleting half the faces. If you press your spacebar really quickly, you should go into 3 orthographic views. Down here you can see the name of the camera, side, front, and top. It's probably going to be easier seen when I select it, so you can see the geometry sort of showing you which way the cameras, these 4 different cameras, are oriented. The best way to do this is if you, again, quickly hit the spacebar, it goes into 4 views. If you bring your cursor down here into the side view or front view and quickly press the spacebar again, it will maximize that camera view. So you could quickly toggle between the views, just making sure that your cursor is in the view you want. Now sometimes things happen and people get several different camera views in different windows. You've got perspective over here and here and here. Things happen. Sometimes if you're just messing around really quickly, you can actually change the sizing of your windows and suddenly you don't know where you are. To sort this quickly out, go here on the leftmost side of Maya, as it has these sort of nested views that will allow you to reset your camera view to the default Maya 4 view or perspective view. I find it's best to just click on the 4 view and you can go right back to pressing the spacebar with impunity to maximize or minimize the window. So now we want to select the faces of this sphere. We're currently in object mode, and you can tell you're in object mode because you have this green selection of the entire object and there's nothing else being shown. However, when you depress the rightmost mouse button, you have a toggle menu which pops up for the duration that you're keeping the button down, and it allows you to drag over to your selections for the different components of that object. We're going to be popping between vertex and edge, and even up here you can reset back to object mode, which we'll be doing, but for the time being we want to select all the upper half of the sphere's faces and delete them. So go down to face here on the bottom and just lift off once you've selected it, and now you can see you're in component mode. Component mode is shown by the light blue selections, meaning that you're no longer in a mode that selects the object as a whole, and if you move your mouse around the object you can see that it's sort of popping a red selection square around the polygon that you will select if you at that moment hit your left mouse button. You will select it. Now the other advantage to this mode is that you're allowed to draw a selection square, which is exactly what we want to do for just the upper half. And with the upper half of those polygons selected, here I am pressing F so I can frame what I have selected. The hotkey for frame all is A. The hotkey for frame what you have selected is F. And you can see it works in component mode as well as object mode. So with the other upper half selected, and I press the space bar to come up here and verify that, oh look, it did not select the other half here. That allows me, and this brings up a good point about you think you've got everything going, but you're only checking it in one view. You need to be very careful about checking in all your views. And that's why kind of toggling between these different camera views is a really good way to work so that you have certainty that you're grabbing everything you need to before you do an operation. So with the faces selected, I simply press the delete key and it will delete just those faces. I have some others to select now, which I can do in any of the different views, and press delete again. And finally I can come up here to the perspective view and grab these last bits and press delete. Now I'm kind of being I'm being a little dangerous in that I'm simply arbitrarily grabbing and deleting things, and it seems like there should be a way of assuring myself certainty of grabbing all of the polygons all the way through. Well, there is a way of doing that, and that way is that we need to manipulate the camera. In Maya, what you don't see is that if you bring up your window outliner, and this is a window that you need to make sure is always up because it kind of shows you your definitive laundry list of everything that you're currently dealing with in Maya, whether you see it or not. In this case, you have P sphere, which is the sphere we're currently manipulating, but you also have all four of the cameras that were introduced earlier when we were popping back and forth between the views. And these cameras are, you can see they're sort of grayed out because they're invisible. If you select each one, you can see that the visibility has been turned off for each of them. However, they do exist in the scenes, and what's happening in this particular case, the reason we can't see a grid here, and we can here, is the camera may be too close to the sphere. Now there's two different concerns here. One is that Maya is only going to draw so many things within its view camera, and the user dictates what that view camera is. So within each modeling window, as you see, there's a separate series of menus, and these menus are kind of the modeling window menus. So for the time being, let's just concentrate on the front camera. If you go up to View, select Camera, and then View again. By the way, what you've just done is select the camera from this particular view, so that's why this selection says Front. You've actually selected the front camera. Go then to View again and go to Camera Attribute Editor. If you click on that, you suddenly get pretty much the controls for that camera, and what we're going to be hunting down is this, the near and far clipping plane. This dictates the range of what that camera draws, and it simply may not have a long enough range to include the grid. So how I fix that is the near clipping plane, instead of being 0.003, is now 1, but the far clipping plane, instead of just being a mere 328, I'm going to throw it out to about 10,000, maybe 100,000. Suddenly we can see the grid because the camera's clipping plane now includes the grid. You can see how close this virtual camera is also to the sphere by making sure that the only thing on is the channel box layer editor, and then seeing that the camera is 328 units back in Z, which is effectively coming off the screen towards us. So if you were to pull that back just a bit more, let's give this the range of 500. We pulled the camera back even more because it's an orthographic camera. We didn't see anything change. But what this does allow us is the ability to grab faces, and suddenly we're grabbing all the way through, because now our camera includes basically the view of the camera shot out to include everything, not just the front, but also the back. And you can see that by having the grid as well. So this camera here is not really fixed, and it's only grabbing, as you see, half of the polygons, i.e. the ones that face us. This view, the side view, has everything, meaning that we have the grid in it because we've pushed back the camera's view. So now we're able to grab everything in the front and back. So that's a little exercise you can use quickly to go into, say, View, Select Camera, View, Camera Attribute Editor. Come in here and change it from 003 to 1, and then here I'll be a little more generous with 100,000. And suddenly we have the grid. In the top view, just to be absolutely consistent, I'll do the same thing. So there we are. So now we've got the grid displayed in pretty much every view, and you can see that it's also consistent. Although we're only drawing 10 units out, these sort of go on ad infinitum, but this sphere still occupies roughly the same space of 20 by 20 units. So let's now go in and cut these polygons here at the lip of this bowl in half. To do that, we're going to use a particular tool that is only available in the polygons mode, which if you come up to Edit Mesh, you can actually see it. I'm sorry, in Mesh Tools. And the Mesh Tools we're going to use is something called the Multi-Cut tool. Now this tool may not be available to some of you. If you come up here to, for those of you that do not have this tool available, you'll see this grayed out. It's available to me, it's in green, meaning it's loaded and ready to use. But some of you may see it in gray, meaning it's not available. And that means that Maya has yet to have it loaded, since this particular powerful tool is a plugin. So to make sure that you have that plugin working, go over here to Window, then down to Settings Preferences, then down to the Plugin Manager. Click on that, and this very long list of different plugins gets loaded. Maya has dozens and dozens of different plugins you can use, but to load all of these would actually take Maya quite some time just to get going. So usually what they do is turn all of them off and only select the ones you need. In this particular case, you're going to be looking for Modeling Toolkit and Modeling Toolkit STD. Modeling Toolkit's really the one you want. If I turn this off, you'll actually see this go gray, but take my word for it, you simply want it green, meaning it's available. So those of you that do not have it available, make sure you have that plugin loaded by clicking on Load and Auto Load, and then you should see it in green. So what the multi-cut tool does now that we have this object selected, and by the way, we've gone from face mode back to hold down the right key, back to object mode. And this means we're back to selecting the object as a whole. So when you kind of dodge between the two, where you're in component mode, you're grabbing edges, you're grabbing vertices, and you're grabbing faces, and you say, I'm done dealing with the components of this object, I'd like to now just grab the object. You can hold down the pop-up menu and go right to object mode. So with this selected, come over to Mesh Tools, the Multi-Cut tool. And when you bring that up, your icon should change, this strange little X-Acto knife. And what we're going to be doing is, if you kind of just trail your mouse along these edges, it tries to second guess where you're going to begin. And it allows you to click on an edge, then drag over, click on another edge, and continue until you're done. Then you press the Enter button, and it will accept that geometry. Now, you need to make sure you do this before you begin. Hold down the Shift key, because with the Shift key down, you now see the word Snap coming up, and that means that this is going to snap exactly in the middle of an edge. So you're assured a very clean bifurcation of the edge exactly at its midway point. Do not click over here. Make sure you go diligently one edge at a time. If you want to rotate your camera, that's fine. You can actually ease off the Shift key, go to your Alt key, and rotate the camera around. Go back to your Shift key and continue this journey of drawing a line exactly across the upper lip, the upper polygon ring that is the very top of this little salad bowl we've made. And what's great about this tool also is you don't need to be exactly on the edge. You can get pretty close to it, and as long as it kind of highlights in red, it means I'm dealing with this edge. You see I'm not exactly on the edge, but now that I've made this complete ring, I press Enter, and immediately I have basically cut these polys, so I now have 2 polygons where I had 1. So with this finished, let's indulge in our first bit of saving. Save scene as Pball _1. I'm going to save this as _2. Now I did a little trick there, by the way. What I did is I said save scene as, and then I clicked on the name, and what it does is it reads that name in. And I don't want to write over that. So what I did was I came in here and simply changed 1 to 2, and it was easier for me to write this out. In case you have a very long, strange name, it saves you typing time. Okay, so now that we have the bottom of the phantasm ball, and we're pretty familiar with popping back and forth between component mode and object mode, and you've got the ability to see this bottom salad bowl with the wireframe on, wireframe off. Let's go in now and select the parts of this that we want to delete. And there's a very specific combination to make sure that the object that we wind up with is not only going to fit the tutorial, but please keep in mind that the reason that I want everyone to do this same assignment lockstep is because we have a texture that we are going to be giving you to put on the object. If the object is not built exactly with the vertices shown in the tutorial, it simply won't fit. So the step here is to go first, right-click on your object if you're in object mode. If you are in object mode, you'll see it by clicking on, again, if you left-click on the object, it turns green when it's selected. You need to be in component mode, and you can do that by going up to your object. Make sure your cursor is on your object. Right-click, hold it down. You have this drop-down menu, and you want to come over to Face. And now with it selected in blue, you can see as you roll your cursor along here, as we talked about earlier, that you can select individual faces. So the particular pattern we're looking for is just like the sort of crenulations you'd find on the top of a castle rampart, which are called merlons. I looked it up. We want to select one polygon, then ignore two, and then select one. And do this all the way around. Just hold down the Shift key when you select. So what I'm doing here is to rotate around the camera, I'm holding down the Alt key, and I'm using the Alt key first, then I'm left clicking and dragging so I can orbit around this. And when I'm ready to select, I press the Shift key down instead, and I left click, boom. And so it's just that kind of alternation of pattern of my selection, avoiding one, select one, avoiding one, select one. And when you're done, you should have a clean pattern all the way around. There should not be a single unselected polygon between two selected ones. So with this specific pattern, and you should have this saved already in case you make a mistake, but with this specific pattern of faces selected, simply press the Delete key on your keyboard under the Insert key, and you should see those polygons disappear. Now what we're ready to do is select the upper edge of this and extrude it in so that we have kind of a thickness to this. As you see, it's all very thin. We want to give this a thickness. So we're going to grab this new upper lip of this bowl and extrude it, scaling in. So the first thing we want to do is we want to go, let's pop over to object mode. Just make sure everything's copacetic. And the second thing we want to do is we want to go in and, just as we did earlier by putting your cursor on the model and holding down the right key to evoke the pop-up menu, we previously did face, we're now going to go with edge. And this is just as you saw as you run your cursor along the model, it will show you what it will currently select on edges were you to select the left mouse key. Were you to click the left mouse key, it would select that edge, like so. And just click off the object somewhere to get rid of it. Now we're looking to grab this upper ring, but it's a lot of pieces. We could do the same thing we did with the faces. Again, that hold down the Alt key and then left mouse to rotate around the object and just grab each edge, holding down the Shift key and just going through, making sure you get the ones that are horizontal as well as vertical, to make sure that you grab that piece right here. By the way, one thing I want to mention is, as I mentioned earlier, when you have an object selected and you press the F key, Maya will zoom into that selected object. The same holds true for component pieces that are selected. So when you press F in this case, it will merely zoom up on the individual components you have selected. Sometimes it's a little better to see them in wireframe, sometimes not. I occasionally will pop over here to this particular bit of shading, which is called X-ray, and turning that on allows you to I turned on X-ray joints by mistake. Shading X-ray allows you to see the object as a semi-opaque polygon mesh. So sometimes when you're in this state, it's a little less confusing than when you have it at full opacity or no opacity, and you can just sort of orbit round and select each individual edge. So that's one way of doing it. Let's turn off X-ray for a minute here. I just want to show those of you that want to use that. Those of you that don't, that's fine too. In this case also, we might want to turn off the grid under display. There, this is much easier to see now. We do need the grid to turn on and off when we're measuring things, but we're pretty sure this is the size we need it. So turning grid off, we can click and then shift click and just select. But let me show you a little shortcut. Now Maya's pretty smart. Maya's pretty intuitive with little shortcuts. And one of its shortcuts is when you are in edge selection mode and you quickly come in on an edge that's part of a circular lip, even one that's been broken like this one, where there are new divots because you've deleted the original face there, were you to double click on an edge, it will select the whole of that ring. Observe. So there. It's worked fine for me just now. If it does not work for you, or if you find yourself just clicking the wrong thing or clicking the other edge, as you see, it sort of makes a guesstimation of what it is I want to grab when I double click one of these interior rings, and it compensates very nicely for these new divots when I do it to this new outer edge. But for those of you that this is not working for whatever reason, you still have that option of going around with the Alt key and just shift selecting everything that you need. So press F. There we are with just the selected bits. So under Edit Mesh, we are now going to extrude these edges. All we need is these edges to be surfaces that glide in. So we don't want to do that with the faces because we don't need all the edges that constitute a polygon cube. So make sure that you are under Edit Mesh, that you are ready to extrude the edge. And I would like to call attention here to the fact that there is an extrude command under vertex. We do not want that. There is an extrude command under face. We also don't want that. We are dealing right with edges. So make sure you don't just come in here and blindly say, Edit Mesh, oh, I see extrude, I'll use that. Hey, it's not working. It won't work if you've got an edge selected and you grab something that's a vertex command or a face command. So down here we have edge extrude. If you click on that, now what Maya has done is it said, great, I am currently going to draw a new polygon starting at each of these edges that you've selected. However, because each of these edges points a different direction, there's the slightest rotation between these two, and there's a more dramatic rotation here, it doesn't really know which direction you want it to pull all these edges in. So it makes kind of a guesstimation, kind of a it grabs the last edge that you selected and it says, I will use this as the control. This edge has a normal going slightly at an angle. The problem is you don't want this control. And let me demonstrate why. Were you to grab this and pull up, everything starts going crazy because it's going along its own normal direction. And we don't want that. We want a universal normal direction. So I'm going to press Z for undo. And I'm not going to click off. It's also vital right now to understand that by virtue of pressing the extrude button, we have already created new polygons all the way around this. So we need to simply pull them apart. They're created. Now we're just pulling them apart from the existing edges. Were you to click off here somewhere, big no-no, it would say, oh, and you'd say, oh, let's do it again. Double click. And wait a minute, the double click doesn't work. No, it doesn't work because you've got double polygons occupying the same space. And you can't see that because the modeling window doesn't really show it to you. So I'm going to press undo about a couple of times until I go back to that control. By the way, I don't recommend pressing undo when you've made a mistake. Sometimes Maya will crash on you when there are more complex series of processes that you've done, this is not very complex, so Maya's able to digest it and say, sure, here's your undos. But just be careful. Do as I say, not as I do in this case, because I save my model during complex operations because I expect the software to blow up on me at key times. So now that I've gone back in history to the point where I have all these new edges selected, I'm going to go over here to the translation button, to the scale tool, and I'm going to click on that so that it understands I want the average distance between all of those selected edges, which is exactly in the center. And from here I have a nice control because it's not a translation, it is a scaling. And what I'm going to do is, because it's sort of the aggregate distance of each of these edges, I can grab this middle yellow controller and make sure that I'm uniformly scaling everything in to about the same unit length that one of these bricks would be. Maybe a touch more. But that's pretty much it. And then I click off. Now what I've done is I have extruded the edge into these new ramparts with new merlons here, all the way around. And all I've done is I've created a thickness, or the illusion of thickness, on the top part, which is all we really want. So now that we're here, let's go up and going into the outliner here, or if you don't like to have it, if you want to have your outliner here on the left or on the right, wherever you put it, or you use the channel box and layer editor, we're going to rename this so that we know exactly. We start being very diligent about renaming these meshes. So in this case, it's going to be Pball bottom underscore mesh. You can't use periods. You can't use spaces with Maya for naming things. You've got to use underscores. Very Unix. So we've just named it Pball underscore bottom underscore mesh. Notice that you can do the same thing here. It's kind of up to you how you want to do it. But there's two different options of renaming this object into a unique name, which helps for organization. Also, notice that when I select this object, the history is starting to get a little more crowded. These are literally all of the different operations we've done on this geometry. And it's going to pose a problem if things get really big because Maya's remembering quite a lot. But for the time being, we want the history on, that's fine. So with this renamed now, go in and save your scene as, and save it as an ASCII file, and name it as Pball 3. So with this saved, you now have the confidence. Now I've gone ahead, of course, and built this out until it's done, but you can rename this as Pball 3. And when you're done with that, come back because I want to teach you about layers. Now, what are layers? Let's bring the grid back here. What are layers? Well, we only have really one thing going on in our scene right now with Pball bottom mesh. Layers is much like Photoshop. It allows you to corral any of a number of models into kind of a section that you can put some visibility commands on or other commands, and I'm going to show you what that means right now. So under the channel box layer editor, again, if you want to evoke that and just that, and you've got these other things up here, make sure the only icon on is this far right one. You should see the channel box layer editor here. Maybe it's floating, maybe not. But underneath all this translation and Cartesian coordinates information we've been messing with is this new menu down here called layers. Now, what layers do under the layers menu is it allows you to create an empty layer, create a layer from selected. To save time, select your Pball bottom mesh, go under layers and click on create layer from selected. And look what happens. Boom. You've actually got a layer, and I want to show you what these different letters mean here. You also, by the way, if you double click on this with your left mouse button, it will come up with a window that allows you to rename the layer to Pball bottom layer. I like to put the name of what it is at the very end, mesh, layer, shader, so that Maya doesn't get confused. If you save these out as ASCII files and you're looking for something to change and all you've got is the same name for several different things within Maya, it can get a little messy. So there are two little boxes here to the rightmost part of the name of the layer. The first one is V for visibility. If you click on that, the object looks like it goes away. It's invisible, but you know it's still there because you've got it here in the outliner window. In fact, unfortunately, if something is invisible or checked off and someone doesn't know about it or know about layers, they can get really confused as to where their object is because there's really nothing going on. I'm pressing frame and it's not really doing anything for me. So the only way you can really see something is that it's here in the outliner window unless it's visible. Now, luckily, whether this is visible or not, the layer does not go away. This information is always going to be here. So over on the right of the visibility switch, there are 3 different states you can have even when this is visible. So it's visible right now. I can click on it and I'm always going to be able to select it like this. Well, what about in a minute when we create the topmost part of this sphere? Well, what if we want to click on the topmost part and yet because it's in the middle we keep accidentally clicking this bottom button, this bottom mesh? And that gets sort of frustrating when you have dozens and dozens of things. So what Maya's let you do is it's got these options for visibility, and this box is sort of staggers between those different visibility options. The first one is T. T is for template. It basically makes things gray, and they're permanently in wireframe. And it's a very, it can be confusing, especially since the grid is also gray and in wireframe. But this allows you to see all kinds of unimportant geometry around what it is you're building so that you know that it's there, so you can get sizing information. And it's basically unselectable in the modeling window. It's always going to be selectable here in the outliner. But it allows you, again, to kind of have a very complex scene where this is just one component where you want to see it, but you don't want to be able to select it. And the next option after T, click it one more time with your left mouse button, is something called R. Now this is a little friendlier to me. This is where you can see it in a shaded mode and yet just as unselectable. So if you kind of want to see a very busy scene with dozens of trees and you've got grassy knolls and you've got little hillocks and yet all you want to deal with is one tiny sort of trunk near the shoreline and you keep selecting the rest of your landscape, putting everything in reference mode is a great way to see it but not be able to select it. So in this case we are going to simply make the, let's put this in reference mode for now because we're going to make another sphere. We're going to make the top of the sphere. Turn the grid back on too. So under create, polygon primitives, sphere. Now I had you guys manipulate the history of the sphere previously to get it to the size we needed. There is of course another route where you can go into the options, which are these squares on the far right of any of these commands. If you click on the options, it actually tells you what kind of sphere it's going to bring up. 2018, 18. We don't really want that. What we do want is, because this sphere is 10, size 10, we want one coming in at size 9. And axis divisions 18 and 18. Boom, go. All right, even if you made a mistake, you can still fix it here, like we did with the lower part, which, by the way, is now unselectable. See how that is? I select everything, but I'm only going to be able to get the topmost sphere now. Very, very clean. Much less frustrating than navigating around 2 different pieces of geometry. By the way, is another little trick I like to do when I rename things, just like I do when I save and I want to copy the name of the thing previously saved. I can double-click the name here, and just like you do with a text file, you can press Control-C for copy, double-click this name, and then Control-V for paste, and just change the word bottom to top. There you go. And toggling the visibility makes the bottom disappear, which is kind of groovy. Put the bottom into template mode. You can see that the final blank here is kind of returns it back to normal. put this into template mode because I want to see it. I don't actually, but I also want to see through it. So what we want to do now is we want to sort of give a haircut to the parts of the sphere, the top sphere, that we're not going to see. So this is best done, of course, in orthographic view. And I like to have the viewport here with all the lines I need. Now, keep in mind, and I'm going to jostle between the states here of the layers to show you this. Keep in mind that if we were to grab all of these faces here in a big swath, because that's half the sphere, right? We'll turn this from template to reference. You can see some of these polygons. We can actually see them because these merlins dip in and out. So we don't want this lest we have these little holes. So going back to template mode, grab all the faces directly below the middle of the equator, out of the hemisphere here. And you can validate it by turning this layer onto reference mode. Do you see any selected faces? Well, no. Wonderful. Go back to the perspective view to validate the ones you've selected. And nice. Okay, so press delete. Great. So now what we have is we have a bottom and a top half. And if you want to, you can grab this and actually create a layer from selected. And just like we did here, I like to double click things, control, and then double click, paste, and just change up layer. Disney's up. Upper layer. There we are. And so now we have something where we can control the top and the bottom visibility depending on what we want to work on. So we're now ready, and by the way, look at the histories here of the upper and lower parts. And now what we want to do is we want to grab the faces at the very top north pole of this upper sphere. So if we want to come in here and simply grab from this distance, that would be a mistake because you're going to be going crazy saying, I think I have it, I'm not sure. Well, here's an easy way through to make sure you have exactly just the first ring of polygons at the top here. Grab something near it and then press F. Zoom. We're right up there, real close and personal. In fact, we want the uppermost ring. And from this orthographic view, good way to go, not even perspective view, F. There we go. Going back to perspective view, we can validate that we have in fact grabbed just that upper little piece of the top of the phantasm ball. Going to come in just on that selection ring. So with all of those faces selected, we're now going to indulge in a little bit of the extrusion of faces. We did so previously with edges with the merlins. Now we want to come in here for faces and use extrude. Now stop what you're doing. This is the same example of that default manipulation tool that I mentioned earlier. You think it's actually going up, but in fact, because there's the slightest angle for each of these polygons, that angularity is taken into account when the extrusion gives you this controller. So if I grab and drag up right now, like so, you're actually going to start getting this weird phalange, this, you know, kind of coronet, as opposed to a perfectly vertical shaft of polygons. Shut your mouth. So if you go to, well, which manipulator do we use then? If you go to the area where you've got all these different manipulators, we used scale previously, now we want to use move. Click on that. Do not click off anywhere here. It will deselect these faces. So if you click on the move tool, you now have a control that allows you to bring just those polygons up. And I'd like to have them dragged up about, let's say, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 units up, roughly. Can we be exacting? Yes. If we hold down the X key and we make sure just to grab the arrowhead that's going straight up, we can actually snap these. And I'm currently snapping them so that they're about the level of that grid line. And with them selected now, I press delete. Alright, extrusions by default do not have any normal smoothing on them. What does that mean? Let's come over here and turn this wireframe on shaded off for a minute. And what you see is this kind of weird faceted tube coming up from a relatively smooth sphere. And that's to be expected. That's how normals are by default drawn during extrusion. They are not smoothed. So I'd like to smooth this new pipe, and of course keep the smoothing here as well. By the way, that default hard edge actually helped us when we scaled in the toothy bits here, because we actually wanted a hard edge on all these. But it works against us when we want to have a smooth edge. Can we do it one of several different ways? Yes. I'll show you two. In object mode, grab the entire object, come over here then to normals, pop down to soften edge, and we'll soften the entire thing. Now, the problem is, of course, this little neck area, it's trying to resolve it as smooth, and it is anything but smooth. It's near to a 90-degree angle, and it's trying to resolve it using, tricks of the light with normals. It didn't add any geometry to manipulate the normals, but there's no real way that you can ask this thing to reasonably take a right angle and resolve it and make it look smooth, because it's not a smooth transition. So instead we want to grab this ring using the edge selection tool, double click, and it should just select that neck ring, and it is this ring that we want to come up to normals, go down to harden edge, and that hardens that edge. And with that edge adequately hardened now, it's got a very hard obvious break from the sphere, it allows the rest of the smoothing to look perfectly acceptable. So with this selected now, let's come in here to a big step, which is delete all by type history. I promised you a cleanup routine. This is it. And under edit, delete all by type history, you should see all this bunch of history that we've given to not just one but both of our objects. Both of them have accrued quite a lot of history in all of our manipulations. And this delete all by type, not delete by type, delete all by type. We want to do a clean sweep of this entire scene's history. So when I click on this button, you should see on the right all that history disappear. And it did. So now at this point, I want to save this scene. I want to make sure that my geometry has been named adequately. Good. And now let's move on to the next step. Okay, this next part is that we are going to effectively take everything that we've already built and put it into the Pball layer. One thing I did not do yet is actually name this layer, so if you haven't already, let's do so. By double-clicking the name, layer 1, you should have a pop-up window. And let's come in here and just name it Pball underscore layer. Now when I make this invisible, you can see that it still takes the bottom, but I now want it to include the top because I effectively want to wipe my modeling window free so I can build a new object. To include this object in that layer, select it, and then with your right mouse key, hover it over the word Pball layer, click, and pop down to Add Selected Objects. And what you've done is you've added this geometry to this layer. You validate it by simply clicking on the visibility. And when it's clear and free, so are you to start building the Mario Brothers pipe. So for this exercise, we want to create a polygon cylinder. Just bring in a regular cylinder. And we want to come into the history and make sure we're all using the same size and poly count. So for this we need a radius of 2. We need a height of 10. We need a subdivision around the axis of 10. And you need a subdivision cap. This is a little trick we're going to be using. Subdivision caps 0. Now watch what happens to this little pie slice here when I say caps 0. Basically what Maya does is it makes the top and the bottom of the cylinder a single polygon. It's an illegal polygon, but it's okay because we're just going to be using this flat surface to extrude up and out to take this simple geometric stalk and make it into a plumbing pipe. Now the first thing I want to do is I want to kind of take this bottom part and flatten it out, bring it up to 0, 0, 0, pop it up. To do that, we can go into any of the orthographic views, right click, grab now vertices, and we should have that entire ring selected. I'm going to go back into perspective and pop into wireframe to make sure that I have that entire ring. Of course, I'm just using the toggle keys of the numbers on my keyboard pad at the top, 4, 5, and 6 to go between 4 and 5, wireframe shaded. I can of course use these same icons as well. So with this all selected, I can go into the orthographic side view, click on the move tool. And by the way, these are the hotkeys. If you just rotate or hover your cursor over it, you can see that it not only gives a description of what that tool is, but it also gives you the hotkey, and it is basically W, E, and R. Q is of course the selection, so that's sort of a QWERTY Western typewriter, upper left hand corner set of buttons. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down the X, and yes, I can do this in perspective view as well, because I live dangerously. Hold down the X because this will pop it onto the grid. I'm going to grab the arrowhead of this arrow, keeping it only in that axis. So when I click, I now snap it up to 0, 0, 0. How do I verify or validate? I go into the orthographic view. Could I have done it in this view as well? Absolutely. So you can use either of these views, whatever you're comfortable with, but you should get this effect that you've grabbed the vertexes from the bottom. Could we have done it with the face? Yes, we could have. This is an interesting sort of eccentricity of Maya. When it's in wireframe and you try to evoke the drop-down menu, it doesn't see it as a selected object until you're right on the wireframe. Then it gives you your modeling window, or your modeling options. In shaded mode, you're basically on that shaded surface at all times. So this is why you're going to see the drop-down menu when you're in shaded mode, and yet the very same space when you're in wireframe does not give it to you. Maya's funny that way. So in component mode, let's go here to face, grab the bottom face, just delete it. We don't want it. Grab the top face, and let's get ready to extrude. So come up now to Edit Mesh. We're going to be extruding faces and doing that little trick of don't use the existing controllers. Go instead to Scale. I'm just using the hotkey R, and make very sure you grab that middle controller to make sure you have a uniform scaling outward. Now, you're basically drawing one polygon right on top of another, but that's okay because we're going to continue extruding and separate them. Once again, come into Edit Mesh. Once again, go to Face Extrude, and now instead of the Scale tool, we're going to use the Move tool, and we're going to push things up. So now we're starting to make that little Mario tube. The last two steps are that you extrude yet again, and use the Scale tool now to bring things in. You're going to do a final drop down for the interior of the pipe, but as you know, what's very important is that we make the circumference of this circle smaller than this, and the best way to check that is to go into the top view and go to wireframe, press F, and make sure that your current selection is actually smaller than the existing stalk, outer stalk of the pipe's trunk. So now we want to do one last extrusion and push this down. And it is now pushed down. You want to make sure it snaps. X, grab just that arrowhead, and there you are. It's exactly flat on the grid. With that done, one of the bits of cleanup you can use is you grab the face and press delete. So now you should have a relatively nice looking little Mario Brothers pipe. Let's indulge now in the cleanup of making sure that this object is got its normals sorted out. In this case, I like to soften the edge of everything and then go in edge mode and shift double click. Sorry. Shift double click, shift double click. Same for this and that, and maybe at the end all the selections that are basically horizontal. There we go. And then with all those selected, go to normal edge, harden, and now every bit that should have a hard lip does, and the rest is relatively smooth. There's a little weirdness going in here. Let me see if I can't fix that. Hold on. Let's try to fix that. That looks like it's... There we are. That's sorted it out. I must have missed an edge, but I could tell there was kind of hinky shading on that one area. That looks pretty good. Okay, let's go in here and let's call this Pball pipe underscore 1. And now we're going to affix this to the surface of the phantasm ball. So let's open up your visibility of your existing layer, showing you the top and the bottom. Let's go into wireframe mode for now so you can sort of see it in the middle. And what we're going to do is we're going to raise this up, this pipe, so that the beginning of its stalk here sort of matches where the beginning of this neck is. And then we're going to rotate it so that it slides along the surface. But we want to be very careful about how we do this. So for this operation, let's make sure that we bring up the outliner as well. So there's our mesh, Pball pipe 1. Great. Let's translate this up in positive 8.5. And those should be the same numbers that work for you guys because we're all using the same world and pretty much the same geometry. And it also gives you kind of a nice check to make sure that your pipe is not obscenely taller or bigger than mine. And at this point, I would like people to now group just the pipe. You can see that in my outliner, I just have the pipe selected. So under Edit, drop down to Group. Okay, now I have a group whose pivot point is at 0, 0, 0. If yours is not, because you have the settings for your group a little different, you may want to come in here to Group, go to the options for it, and make sure you have the same options as I do. You have grouping under Parent, your group pivot is at the origin, and you preserve the position. Or you could simply move the pivot point of the group down to 0, 0, 0. That's fine too. Use Grid Snap. So with this selected, and I can go into shaded mode for this, I'm going to rotate this group 45 degrees. And when I do, I know it's going to have perfect contact along the surface because the pivot point is the same pivot point as this sphere. So it's now running along the surface of it pretty cleanly. There's a little bit of interpenetration, but that's okay. It's pretty clean. So I want to create 2 more of these and have them on equidistant parts of the sphere, equidistant from this one. To do that, I'm going to duplicate this group. So again, here's an operation you need to be careful on. Make sure what you have selected is the group, not the mesh. With the group selected, come up here to duplicate. You have a new group? Wonderful. Rotate in Y. Let's do this 120. With that same group selected, we can do this again. Duplicate. And instead of 120, we want to type in 240. There we go. I think shading should show this a little better. So what I've done is I've used the rotation of the group to put things where they should be. If I wanted to eyeball this, I'd have my work cut out for me because I could make it look good, but I simply wouldn't have the numerical accuracy that I'm getting by grouping it and letting the geometry and letting the math do the work for me. So in this case, you've got 3 groups, 3 equidistant pipes, and also one of the advantages is that Maya has created the exact same geometry. So as long as we make sure our initial mesh is perfectly clean with all the normals, it will do the same with these copies. So make sure that your initial prototype, as it were, of the pipe is very clean. Now we want to free this geometry up. We have a lot of groups starting to accumulate here. We want to free this geometry up from its groups. The problem is that if we delete these groups outright, we might delete the mesh, or we would just have this some of this geometry will pop back in place. So we want to come up here and effectively delete all history again. You see there was a lot of history down here, and we want to unparent this geometry, not ungroup, but unparent it from its group. And you do that by coming up here to the edit menu and going down to unparent. Boom. This mesh stays exactly where it should, but it's now free from this empty group, which you can delete. There's another way of doing this, which is you can grab all the geometry. This, of course, is in a reference layer, so it's not going to grab it. But you can grab all the geometry here in the modeling window, not in the outliner. If you grab models in the modeling window, it will grab just the models, not the groups. So with all of those in one fell swoop, you can unparent them all, and they are now all free of their groups, allowing you to come in here and just delete groups 2 and 3. What Maya has done also, since we ungrouped it, it can't have 3 different meshes all named Pball pipe underscore 1. They were named Pball pipe underscore 1 when they all had separate groups, but now they're at the peer level. Maya automatically renamed them 2 and 3. Kind of what we want. So at this point, we want to grab these new pipes, add them to your layer, get rid of the visibility, and save this scene one more time. Okay, time to start the third phase. We want to bring in yet another cylinder. And let me give you the vital statistics on this one. This particular cylinder is going to be radius 2, height is 3, and the subdivisions are going to be 12. And do not use the caps trick in this one. I know if you turn it to 0, it'll get rid of all that those little weird asterisk spider webbing. We want that to stay in place, so make sure the subdivision caps are at 1. We will be using them. We want to turn this on its side. I'm going to use the rotate X. You could use rotate Y. Doesn't really matter. I want to delete one side of the faces. And to do that, I can grab them all one at a time using the shift click. Or I can come in here, grab the whole of them, shift unselect what I don't want, and then use wireframe to determine that I have just the faces on one side of this little drum selected, and press delete. You cannot delete edges, you cannot delete vertices, you can only delete faces. Make sure you're in face mode. Now I want to make sure that these vertices here snap at the axis here at 0, 0, 0. So I'm going to go into my orthographic view, hold down the X key for grid snap, grab just the arrowhead in the direction that I want, and move it until, boom, it snaps at 0, 0, 0. Because this side, these faces here, I'm going to start drawing a doorknob by extrusions. So these set of faces, the remaining ones, I'm going to use my little trick of selecting everything and unselecting what I don't want, validating I have just that sort of wagon wheel series of faces selected. I'm going to come up here to edit mesh and extrude again. We are going to extract them we're going to actually, we're going to scale them. Now what I did was not extrude another series of polygons, I just changed my manipulator. And you're allowed to do that. So by the way, if I've scaled them down, but if I immediately then started pulling them out, it would grab, I have not done a new extrusion. So to create a little divot in this doorknob, I want to come over to Edit Mesh, continue the extrusion, extrude yet again, and I'm really extruding at every point along this operation so that my extrusion kind of matches the previous size that I had. This is me just kind of eyeballing it. That's okay. And I want to extrude again. And I'm just using the hotkeys for these controls. And I want to extrude again, and this is going to be a combination of extrusion out first, and then I'm going to pop immediately to the scale tool and scale it down, creating this kind of strange little doorknob. I'm going to push it in again. This bevel, as it were. And that's a combination of both extrusion and scaling, translation after the extrusion and then scaling. And I'm going to do it one more time. Only this time I'm actually going to push it in just a bit, like so. So now we got that cool little doorknob look. And we are going to indulge in some booleans at this point. So create a polygon primitive cube, drag it out where you can see it. This cube is a very odd shape. This is no cube, this is a Lego brick. So I'm going to come into polycube, width is 2. Ah, sir, you are no brick. And it looked wonky like that because the polygon primitives cube, if you go into the options, these have been changed. If I reset them, they'll go back to 111. There you go. So close this, object mode, and let's come in to change the scaling on certain on the dimensions, so we can take this cube and make it more like the prongs of an electrical cord. And to do that, we want to take the scaling of, let's see if it's X that I want it in. Yes, it is. You may be Z depending on which way you initially rotated this can. But I pretty much have the dimensions I'm looking for as far as the overall thickness. And in Y, let's try 1.5. That may be a bit much, but maybe not. Will that fit exactly in? Again, I'm not going to use perspective. Perspective lies. I want to come into orthographic view. Yeah, that fits nicely. Wonderful. And to make sure I have perfect parallel series of these, I want to translate in X to 0.5. I'm going to duplicate this, and I'm going to translate that to positive 5. Now I've got one exactly on either side. Now is that going to fit? And it is. Okay, wonderful. Can verify that it's going in. Wonderful. So here's the point of this doorknob exercise, as it were. We're going to take these two cubes and just push them and interpenetrate the geometry, because we're going to be using the Boolean operation to and take these cubes to dig out that same space. These two similar looking bits of geometry will be digging out holes in the doorknob so that you have what effectively looks like an electrical outlet from the doorknob handle. Very dangerous thing to have in your house. So the operation for Booleans is best done when you don't have a lot of history. So let's come up here and delete all history again. And you want to select the doorknob first and shift select the geometry of one of the first cubes you want it to dig out. So the selection order for Maya is select that which you are digging from, i.e. the dirt, and then select what is doing the digging, i.e. the shovel. So with that operation, and you can see that this soon-to-be prong is green, means that's the last thing that was selected. Come up here to Mesh, Booleans, Difference, but hold. Go to the options first. We have one last detail. Make sure that in the options for the difference of Booleans, you have things set to edge. Edge displays actually the geometry that'll be cut out, that'll be dug out on the inside. The default setting is that it just creates a hole. So make sure you're on edge mode and apply. So now you see that it's dug out a hole, but more importantly, it has the interior geometry of that hole. And you do the same operation for the second one. And now we have a doorknob electrical outlet. Wonderful. So we need to resolve some issues here, which is that the Boolean operation has created dozens of little tiny vertices here. An example here is that it's done a pretty good job digging things out, but it has not optimized these vertices. So really now what we're dealing with is we've got a lot of extra geometry that Maya is going to create, because it's got to resolve all these faces into quads and triangles. But we can beat Maya at its own game by simply taking each of these oddly shorn polygons and moving them vertex by vertex using vertex snap. So I'm going to grab one vertex and then hold down the V key, and I'm going to pop it to an existing corner, like so. There we are. I'm going to grab the next vertex, move it over there as well. And I'm going to try and I'm going to go through each of these vertexes and resolve them so that we just have a series of triangles drawing the same image without doing anything new or superfluous to the geometry. So what I'm doing now is I'm just snapping all the geometry to its nearest corner. And that's going to help me when I finally do my merge of all these little vertices. They will be welded onto each other, and it will keep the surface clean. So I don't have all this strange double and triple vertices in the geometry that necessitate a lot more faces being drawn than we actually care to have. Now it's briefly changing the surface look because it's popping to other vertices that I don't need it to pop to. But when I get near the vertex that I want, it behaves just fine. In fact, this is an operation that arguably is best done if you're in kind of vacillating between wireframe and hard shaded. And everyone's vertices should be fairly similar to the ones I have here. I don't think there's a lot of difference between, there should not be a lot of difference between the operations, between our geometries, because we were really careful about making sure that we had the same amount of geometry, the same size, the same polygon count. Whoops, what are we doing here? Oh, I see, it kind of popped back. Ah, see, this is part of snapping things. It looked just fine until I realized Maya was messing with me. So I'm going to do an undo until I'm back in the saddle again with my controls. Okay. This looks fairly well resolved. So what I have now is a very... Isn't that funny how Maya does that? It popped on a very distant point, but it looked like it was still on. Maya, you so crazy. So we have a series of geometry geometric faces, there, just for consistency. And the vertices are resting quite literally on top of each other, and we need to resolve those by going into object selection mode, and you want to come up to edit mesh, merge components, and the options allow me to see the proximity with which vertexes and faces and edges can be next to each other before it welds them, and that's a pretty good close number, 0.03, because I have these vertexes all pretty much occupying the same space, and that means they should have even lower number than that. So if I now hit apply, I have poly merge over here, and when I select a singular vertex, it's only got one vertex, not dozens and dozens. So the next operation we want to indulge in is smoothing out these normals, and that's best done by our little routine of softening everything. Okay, so I want to grab the edges that I want to keep, that I want to show their harsh change from one direction to the next. I can use the hardening of the normals. And this particular object has more than just your usual set of rings, including this interface of the doorknob, is that these Boolean shapes, all those edges are ones we're going to want to grab. So I'm just going to grab those one at a time, or I can go into wireframe mode and sort of grab them, attempt to grab them in one fell swoop, but I have to be careful not to grab the exterior, the ones that constitute the exterior face, because that will start, that will sort of expose the fact that they are constructing a face that's supposed to be flat, and you'll start seeing all kinds of breakage in the face, in the flat face of this doorknob. In fact, I've inadvertently grabbed one right there. So what I'm trying to do is grab all these interior space edges. It's a little tricky. I should probably get a little closer, but live dangerously. So I've grabbed all these edges, and in shaded mode I want to have these now hardened, and looks wonderful. So this face that I was talking about, if I had inadvertently grabbed any of these edges and hardened them, you'd see that weird breaking. Those must remain flush. They must remain smooth. The interior also is pretty visible because of all the hard edges of the normals in there. And the doorknob looks pretty good. So with the doorknob selected, you may want to save again. And I'm going to utilize a method to create its doppelganger. I want to create a copy. Now I could duplicate it like so, just using the hotkey of Command D, and then flip it around by typing in the rotation in Y, and then moving it over until I'm sure that these two match up exactly. I could do that, and there's certainly nothing wrong about it, but I want to utilize something that allows us to mirror the geometry. And the mirroring geometry is under Mesh, and what mirror geometry does, I'm going to bring up the options for it, is that it actually creates a mirror of the selected object, as per the name, and will automatically merge the vertices with the original object if you so desire. So it looks to me like this is in the -x, +x, I believe. I'll do one test here. Apply. Nope, that did not work. It's actually in the Z, and that's sort of like two Apollo moon units kissing. Try it that way. That's the wrong axis. We're getting closer. There we are. It was -z in this particular instance, and now this is one piece of geometry. To get rid of this middle bit, this middle ring, I can grab the whole of it, of its vertices, and then simply snap them over to the nearest ring. I can do so by holding down V, since I have absolutely no assurance that this is on the grid. I want to use V, not grid snap. And once I get to the edge, it simply snaps as a whole ring to those. And then I can come up to the edit, or to mesh, and merge, edit mesh, and merge components. And now I've merged the polygons again. And it's even left these alone because, again, 0.03 is a pretty tiny threshold. So now I have this doorknob, and I'm going to come into the name and name it. And I'm going to delete its geometry history, and I'm going to add it to the layer. But before I add it, I want to put it in the right position. So in this case, I want to raise it up and place it right on top of the neck stalk that we made. Now because we added these, because we used the mirror geometry, we don't really have the pivot point in the center of this object. To kind of resort it out, go under Modify, Center Pivot, and it should reach that always takes the average space of all the mass of your object and places the pivot point right there. So I want to slightly increase the scale of this so that I can accommodate the neck of this, and I'm going to try and use these numbers. So I'm going to use 1.5 and 1.5 and then 1.1. Does that work? It does. Again, you may have rotated your object in a different direction than mine, so these numbers remain the same, just switched around until you don't want an oval, you don't want to squash this. I just had it basically at 1.5 all around, and I just scaled it in on the Z axis to 1.1, so it was a little more squashed just in this axis. So that's where this should rise to, and it is something that you want to more or less eyeball so that it's at the very top, and there's the slightest bit of interpenetration because you want it to go into the object, sort of like it's holding it. And then you add it to the layer, and let's save this one more time, certainly not the last time, and move to the final lightning round of the Phantasm Ball modeling, which is creating a lightning rod. So under polygon primitives, again, read in one more cylinder, and the radius is going to be 1.5. The height is going to be 8. Subdivisions, and this is important because we're going to be doing subdivisions on both width, subdivision axis and height. Subdivision axis should be 10, and the subdivision height should be 7. So there we are. Do not use the caps trick of 0. Keep the caps. We're going to use those. So getting in close and personal on this, I want to have everyone grab the faces on the bottom. And I'm doing the old select unselect trick. Make sure it's there, and I delete. But what we're going to do in this particular case is we're going to grab the ringlets, the odd numbered ringlets of the polygons of this cylinder, like so. There will be 3 sets. Here's the first, the second, and the third. So what I have is a buffer of unselected polygon rings at the top and bottom. It's probably a little more obvious in the perspective mode. And we're going to indulge in something that we have not done thus far, which is we're going to use the default extrusion tools. Remember, every time we've done extrude thus far, we do not use the controls that Maya by default gives us, because they align things according to each of the selected objects or selected components normal orientation. But in this particular case we want that, and I want to show you why first. So we extrude, and here's the default control Maya gives us. Again, be very careful. It looks like it's coming off of this polygon. It's not. By rotating around, I verify that it's coming off of this polygon. And it's very important because you need to identify which way is out from that one control. Why? Because when we move it, it will move each and every one of these selected polygons in a relative fashion, not an absolute fashion, which is what we've been doing thus far. So if I grab the tip of this arrow, this blue arrow, and push it in, watch what happens. All of them get pushed in according to their normal. And so I've quickly made a nice little lightning rod. So for cleanup purposes, we want to come in here to vertex, grab the vertex, raise it a bit to give it a nice capped top. We want to come in here also and make sure that we've got smoothing in all the right places. So I'm going to use my old trick, of course, going in and softening each and every one of the edges, and then I go through and select all the edges that that needs hardening. And this will be a selection of all the exterior as well as interior rings. There are some automated processes that allow you to do this, but I frankly am very much a fan of doing your work manually, especially when you're learning the software, because tools come and go, but ultimately if you know what you're doing, you can always build whatever object you want with just 4 or 5 basic tool sets. Alright, and with those selected, harden edge, and now you've got pretty good looking lightning rod. And you want to come in here and rename it to Pball lightning rod underscore mesh. And we can make everything else visible. And what I would like people to do now is have this rotated along the head of the doorknob. And there'll be 2 of them that look like antenna. So to do this, what you want to do is you want to determine the center of things. Well, we determined the center of this sphere because we knew that it started, that the center of this sphere was 0, 0, 0. In this case, we do not know, nor do we have any coordinate system to let us know what is the center of this doorknob. I'm going to take it off of reference because we actually need to see the middle of the doorknob. Well, we do have the pivot point, which is pretty cool, but how do we align something to a pivot point? Well, there's an easier way of doing it, which is that we sink this slightly into the top head of the doorknob, sink it ever so slightly. You know, you don't want to have a gap of it kind of floating out here. Sink it in just enough that it takes the entirety of the base. And then we go to manipulate the pivot point itself. But before we do this, make sure you're in the proper view. By the way, look what I've just done. I've created 2 perspective windows. Yikes! Still happens to even Professor. So we click on what I mentioned earlier, and lo and behold, we are reset for our 4 views. So in this case, we want to turn on the wireframe on shaded, because what's important is this point right here. I'm going to take the pivot point of the lightning rod, and I'm going to use vertex snap, but I'm not snapping it to any vertex here. I'm going to snap it to the vertex right here. And that's going to be my rotation point because I know that's the middle of the doorknob. So I'm going to hold down D and V, and I'm not going to grab that middle yellow circle. I'm going to grab this top yellow line that looks like one of the edges, and I'm going to sink this down until boom, I'm right there in the center, and it's snapped to it. So I know it's right in the center, and I'm allowed the luxury of just rotating this seeing what it's manipulated and rotate. I'm rotating it in Z, so I can type in 45. I'm then going to duplicate this, and the second lightning rod I'm going to put at negative 45. And now I have a finished phantasm ball. And I can even add these at the very end of the layer. Bring them all up. Delete the... you may want to save a version with history, but the last version that I saved definitely does not have history on it, because I want nothing but meshes here. No empty groups, nothing like that. And so I save scene as Pball 8, and that's my latest version. And that's the modeling for the phantasm ball.